The gavel slammed down like thunder in the silent courtroom. Carter Hayes watched his 6-year-old son's face crumble as the social worker's cold voice sliced through the air. "Your Honor, this father lacks the fundamental skills to raise a child properly." The smell of old wood and desperation filled the sterile room as Carter's calloused hands trembled against the defendant's table. Behind him, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, commanding. A figure in the gallery rose, medals catching the harsh fluorescent light. The decorated soldier's weathered face held secrets that would shatter everything Carter thought he knew about his own family. But what this stranger was about to reveal would change not just the judge's mind, but the very definition of what makes a hero. What happened next would prove that real heroes never come from where we expect them to. 3 months earlier, dawn broke gray and cold over Cedar Falls, Iowa. Carter Hayes stood in his garage at 5:30 in the morning, warming his hands around a chipped coffee mug while the space heater struggled against the October chill. The scent of motor oil and old leather filled the air as he surveyed the day's work ahead. 3 oil changes, a brake job, and the transmission rebuild that would hopefully pay this month's rent. Through the small window overlooking the apartment above, he could see Logan still sleeping, curled around the stuffed dinosaur that had belonged to his mother. 2 years since Sarah's accident, and Carter still felt like he was drowning in responsibility, grasping for solid ground that never seemed to come. The weight of single parenthood pressed down on him like the October sky, heavy, gray, and endless. Logan appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, his sandy hair sticking up at odd angles, clutching his backpack and the lunch Carter had packed the night before. The boy's shoes were getting too small again, but Carter had already spent this week's grocery money on Logan's asthma inhaler. "Dad, Tommy Martinez says his mom thinks you're too sad to take care of me properly," Logan said matter-of-factly, the way children deliver devastating truths without understanding their impact. Carter's chest tightened as he knelt down to tie Logan's shoes, hiding the pain that statement caused while forcing his face into a reassuring smile. Small towns bred big opinions, and apparently everyone in Cedar Falls had theories about Carter's fitness as a father. The whispers followed them everywhere, at the grocery store, the post office, even church on the rare Sundays when Carter could find clean clothes for both of them. The phone rang as Carter was loading Logan into his battered pickup truck, its rusty tailgate held closed with a bungee cord and desperate hope. Principal Martinez's voice carried bad news across the crackling connection. Logan had been in another fight at school, the 3rd incident this month. This time, he'd pushed Jessica Williams after she'd said something about kids without mothers being broken inside and destined for trouble like their daddies. Carter's stomach dropped as he listened to the details, knowing that each incident was another mark against him in the court of public opinion that seemed determined to find him guilty. During the drive to Cedar Falls Elementary, Logan sat silent in the passenger seat, his small hands clenched into fists that reminded Carter painfully of himself at that age. "Fighting doesn't solve problems, buddy," Carter said gently, though he understood the rage that drove his son's actions better than he cared to admit. At the school, Patricia Whitman waited like a predator who'd finally cornered her prey after months of patient stalking. Her grey suit was perfectly pressed, her clipboard thick with forms that would dissect Carter's life into manageable bureaucratic pieces for systematic evaluation and judgment. She introduced herself as a social worker from Child Protective Services, her voice carrying the authority of someone who held families' fates in her manicured hands and wielded that power without hesitation. "Mr. Hayes, we need to discuss Logan's behavioral patterns and your home environment," she said, her pale eyes taking inventory of Carter's work clothes, the grease still embedded under his fingernails, and the defeated slump of his shoulders. Logan pressed closer to his father's side, instinctively recognizing the threat this woman represented to their small, fragile world that had already endured so much loss. The principal's office suddenly felt like an interrogation room, with Patricia as prosecutor, judge, and jury all rolled into one terrifying package. Patricia's questions came like surgical strikes, each one designed to expose weakness and inadequacy with clinical precision that left no room for context or compassion. How many hours did Carter work each week? Who supervised Logan after school when the garage stayed open late? What did he know about child psychology and behavioral management techniques? Carter answered honestly, watching her make notes with rapid, aggressive strokes that felt like evidence being gathered for his prosecution in some cosmic court. When she asked about Logan's emotional stability and attachment issues stemming from maternal loss, Carter's hands clenched beneath the conference table until his knuckles went white. This woman had never sat up all night when Logan had pneumonia, never felt the pure joy of an unexpected hug after a particularly hard day, never witnessed the quiet courage his son showed every single day just by getting up and facing a world that had taken his mother away too soon. Yet somehow she believed she understood what was best for them both. The meeting ended with a threat disguised as bureaucratic procedure and professional concern for child welfare. Patricia would be conducting routine home visits to assess their living situation and Carter's parenting capabilities over the next several weeks. Carter had 30 days to demonstrate improved parenting standards or face a formal custody review that could result in Logan being placed in foster care while the courts decided his fate. As they walked to the truck afterward, Logan's small hand slipped into Carter's calloused palm like a lifeline in stormy waters that threatened to pull them both under. "Did I get you in trouble, Dad?" the boy whispered, his voice thick with guilt that no 6-year-old should ever have to carry on his narrow shoulders. Carter squeezed his son's hand gently, his heart breaking at the fear in those blue eyes that looked so much like Sarah's it sometimes took his breath away. "You're not in trouble, Logan. Sometimes grown-ups just need to make sure kids are safe and happy." But even as he said the words, Carter wondered if he was lying to them both about their chances of staying together. That evening, Carter struggled with the books at his kitchen table while Logan did homework on the couch nearby, the television providing background noise they couldn't afford to lose by canceling their basic cable package. The stack of overdue bills seemed to mock him from across the worn Formica surface. Electricity, insurance, Logan's medical expenses from his last asthma attack, and the looming threat of eviction if he couldn't come up with next month's rent by the 15th. The garage brought in enough money to survive day by day, but never enough to thrive or build any kind of security for their future. Patricia Whitman's visit had highlighted every inadequacy in their modest life with brutal clarity, turning their simple existence into evidence of his failures as a parent. On the mantel, a photograph showed 2 young men in military uniforms, their arms around each other's shoulders and their faces bright with the confidence of soldiers who believed they were invincible and would come home to build the families they dreamed about. Danny Hayes smiled back at Carter from that frozen moment in time, forever 21 and forever lost to an IED blast outside Fallujah 3 years ago. The mysterious help began subtly, almost invisibly, like guardian angels working in the shadows to ease burdens Carter didn't even realize he was carrying. Carter would arrive at the garage to find small repairs completed overnight. A loose door handle tightened, a broken window latch fixed, fresh coffee waiting on his workbench still warm in the morning chill. At first he assumed Mrs. Henderson from next door was being kind, despite her usual disapproval, but the elderly woman made it abundantly clear she disapproved of his single-parent lifestyle and considered Logan a disruptive influence on their quiet neighborhood. Someone had changed the oil in his truck while he slept, checked the air in his tires, even left a bag of groceries on his doorstep with no note or explanation attached. Logan mentioned seeing the sad man with soldier eyes watching their building from across the street during his after-school walks, but when Carter looked through the window, no one was there except shadows and the lingering sense of protective presence that he couldn't quite shake. The truth began to emerge during Logan's worst crisis yet, a playground incident that would change the trajectory of their entire lives. A group of older boys cornered him at the school playground during recess, taunting him about his dead mother and his loser dad, who couldn't afford decent clothes or a proper house like normal families. Logan fought back with desperate fury born of months of accumulated pain and frustration, earning himself a black eye, a split lip that required 6 stitches, and a reputation as a troubled child who needed professional intervention. Carter's hands shook as he filled out emergency room paperwork, Patricia Whitman's warnings echoing in his mind like a death sentence he couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. This incident would be the final nail in his coffin, irrefutable proof that he couldn't protect his son or provide proper supervision in a dangerous world that seemed determined to hurt them both. As they waited in the sterile hospital corridor under harsh fluorescent lights, a figure emerged from the shadows with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to handling crisis situations with competence and calm. "You must be Carter Hayes," the stranger said, his voice carrying decades of command experience and hard-won wisdom earned in places most people couldn't imagine. "I'm James Stone." He was tall and lean, with silver hair that caught the fluorescent lights and eyes that held too much sorrow for any one lifetime to contain without breaking under the weight. When he knelt beside Logan with surprising gentleness, examining the boy's injuries with practiced efficiency that spoke of medical training, something about his presence calmed the child immediately in ways that surprised and confused Carter. The man moved with the confident grace of someone who'd tended to injured soldiers in places where medical help was hours away, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. "Heroes are the people who show up when it matters most," James told Logan quietly, when the boy asked through swollen lips if he was a real soldier, like the ones in his favorite storybooks about brave men who protected others. James began appearing regularly in their lives, always at the edges, always when needed most, like a guardian angel with mysterious motivations that he refused to explain. He'd arrived just as Carter struggled with a difficult repair job that threatened to take all day, offering silent assistance with tools that appeared as if by magic from a well-stocked vehicle parked discreetly across the street. He brought Logan books about famous battles and military history, sitting patiently as the boy peppered him with endless questions about courage and honor and what it truly meant to be brave in an uncertain world. Carter remained wary despite his gratitude, wondering what this stranger wanted from them, what price his unexpected help would ultimately carry when the bill came due. James never asked for payment or explanation, never overstayed his welcome or made demands on their limited time and resources. He simply appeared when crisis struck and vanished when peace returned, like smoke dissipating in morning air. The relationship between Carter and James grew slowly, built on shared silences and unspoken understanding rather than words or detailed explanations about their respective pasts. James had the unmistakable bearing of a career military man, straight posture that spoke of decades in uniform, economical movements that wasted no energy, eyes that missed nothing and revealed even less about the thoughts behind them. He deflected personal questions with military precision, changing subjects when Logan asked about his medals or his family with the skill of someone trained in information security and operational awareness. Carter sensed depths of loss in the older man that matched his own grief, layers of sorrow that spoke of battles fought and comrades lost in foreign lands. When pressed about his interest in their family, James would only say that he'd made a promise to someone important, and he intended to keep it no matter the personal cost or consequences. Patricia Whitman's surprise inspection arrived like a natural disaster. Sudden, devastating, and completely beyond Carter's ability to control or prepare for adequately. She appeared at their door on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard, a camera, and the cold efficiency of someone documenting evidence for a predetermined conclusion that would destroy their family. Every aspect of their modest apartment became ammunition against Carter's fitness as a parent in Patricia's systematic evaluation that missed nothing and forgave less. The peeling paint on the bathroom wall, the second-hand furniture held together with hope and duct tape, Logan's toys scattered across the living room floor from the night before, all of it was photographed and documented as proof of inadequate living conditions that endangered a child's well-being. She questioned Logan about his meals, his bedtime routine, his feelings about living with his father, twisting the boy's honest answers into evidence of neglect and emotional damage that would support her case for removal from the home. James watched the inspection from across the street, his hands clenched into fists as Patricia systematically dismantled Carter's life with bureaucratic precision that felt almost personal in its thoroughness. Later, he approached with unusual urgency in his weathered features and something approaching carefully controlled anger in his normally calm voice. "She's building a case against you," he said simply, his military training evident in his direct assessment of the threat they faced together. "You need to be prepared for what's coming next, because she won't stop until she gets what she wants." When Carter asked how he could possibly know Patricia's intentions or predict her next moves with such certainty, James's expression hardened with something that looked like painful personal experience. "I've seen bureaucrats destroy good families before," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of witnessed tragedy that still haunted his sleep. "They mistake poverty for negligence, grief for incompetence, and love for weakness that needs to be corrected through government intervention." Something in his tone suggested he'd witnessed such destruction firsthand, but he refused to elaborate further despite Carter's pressing questions about his past. The custody hearing arrived with the inevitability of an execution date that had been circled on the calendar for weeks, marked in red ink like blood. Carter sat in the defendant's chair wearing his only suit, borrowed from the funeral director who'd handled Sarah's service, 3 sizes too large and smelling faintly of mothballs and other people's grief. Logan clutched his hand with desperate strength, confused by the formal proceedings, but sensing the gravity of what was happening around them with the intuition children possess for detecting danger to their security. Patricia Whitman presented her case with clinical efficiency, painting Carter as an overwhelmed single father who provided inadequate supervision, poor living conditions, and insufficient emotional support for his traumatized son who deserved better than poverty and instability. She described the garage as an industrial hazard, where Carter forced his child to spend hours unsupervised among dangerous tools, toxic chemicals, and the constant threat of injury from heavy machinery that had no place in a child's daily environment. Judge Helen Crawford listened with the patient expression of someone who'd heard countless custody disputes over her 23 years on the bench, her weathered face revealing nothing of her thoughts or sympathies. Carter's lawyer, an overworked public defender who looked barely old enough to vote, let alone represent families in crisis, made weak counter-arguments about loving fathers and difficult circumstances that carried no weight against Patricia's mountain of documented evidence and professional recommendations. When Carter took the stand to defend himself, his words felt inadequate against the social worker's clinical assessment and systematic destruction of his character as a parent. He spoke about loving Logan with everything he had, about working multiple jobs to provide for them both, about trying to be both mother and father to a grieving child who deserved so much more than their modest circumstances could provide. But love didn't pay bills or prevent playground fights or satisfy bureaucratic requirements for adequate parenting, and Judge Crawford's expression remained carefully neutral throughout his testimony. The most devastating moment came when Patricia called Logan to testify about his home life, a legal maneuver that felt like emotional warfare designed to destroy what remained of their family. The boy walked to the witness stand on trembling legs, his small frame dwarfed by the formal courtroom setting that must have felt like an alien landscape designed to intimidate and confuse children. Under Patricia's carefully worded questions, Logan admitted to feeling scared sometimes, to missing his mother desperately every single day, to wishing his father was home more often and didn't have to work so hard just to keep them afloat financially. Carter's heart shattered as his son's honest answers were twisted into evidence against him, each innocent admission becoming another nail in the coffin of their family's future together. When asked about feeling safe at home, Logan's voice dropped to barely a whisper that the court reporter had to ask him to repeat twice. "Sometimes I have bad dreams about strangers taking me away from Daddy," Logan said, his blue eyes finding Carter's across the courtroom with desperate hope for reassurance. "But Daddy always makes the scary feelings go away with hugs and stories about brave people who never give up." Patricia pressed him about his father's work schedule, about spending time alone in the garage after school, about whether he ever felt neglected or ignored by a parent too overwhelmed to provide proper attention and care. Logan answered with the devastating honesty of childhood, describing long days when Carter seemed impossibly sad, times when there wasn't enough food in the refrigerator to last until payday, moments when his father had to choose between buying groceries and paying for Logan's asthma medicine at the pharmacy. Each word felt like a betrayal to Carter, though he knew his son was simply telling the truth about their difficult reality with the innocence of someone too young to understand the consequences of his testimony. Then James Stone stood up in the gallery, his movement causing every head in the courtroom to turn toward him with sudden attention and curiosity. The medals on his chest caught the harsh fluorescent light as he approached the bench with the bearing of someone who'd commanded respect in places where life and death decisions were made on a daily basis under impossible circumstances. "Your Honor, I request permission to speak as a character witness for Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in uniform and the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard when he spoke. Judge Crawford studied him with new interest, noting the Distinguished Service Cross prominently displayed among his decorations, along with other medals that spoke of extraordinary service and sacrifice in defense of his country. James identified himself as Lieutenant Colonel James Stone, retired, a man who'd served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, leading soldiers in combat and bringing them home safely against overwhelming odds and enemy resistance. "I've observed this family closely for the past 3 months," James testified, his voice steady and clear as parade ground commands delivered to troops under fire. "I've watched Carter Hayes work 16-hour days to provide for his son, seen him sacrifice his own meals to ensure Logan never goes hungry, witnessed him choose his child's medical needs over his own basic comfort and necessities without hesitation or complaint. This man wakes up at 5 every morning to make his son's lunch by hand, helps with homework until past midnight, when his own exhaustion threatens to overwhelm him, and still finds energy to read bedtime stories and chase away nightmares with patience that would humble saints and shame kings." His words carried the weight of absolute conviction, backed by specific examples that Patricia couldn't refute or dismiss as hearsay from someone with obvious bias in favor of the defendant. James described Carter's gentle patience when Logan woke up screaming from dreams about his mother's accident, his creative solutions to single-parent challenges that would stump trained professionals with advanced degrees, his unwavering dedication to his child's well-being despite circumstances that would break weaker men completely. "I've served with fathers who abandoned their children without a second thought when deployment became inconvenient for their personal plans," James continued, his voice growing stronger with each word and carrying the ring of absolute truth. "I've seen wealthy families destroy their kids through neglect disguised as privilege and abundance that money can't cure. But I have never, in 30 years of military service and civilian life, witnessed a father love his child more completely or sacrifice more willingly than Carter Hayes loves and sacrifices for Logan every single day without fail." The courtroom fell silent, except for the soft sound of someone crying in the gallery and the mechanical hum of the air conditioning system that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. But then James revealed the truth that changed everything, the secret he'd carried for 3 long years, like a sacred trust that defined his purpose. "Your Honor, I didn't come to observe this family by accident or casual interest in their welfare," he said, his voice thickening with emotion he'd kept buried since his retirement from active duty. "I served with Logan's uncle, Danny Hayes, in the 2nd Infantry Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom from 2019 to 2021. Danny was my communications specialist, a 19-year-old kid from Iowa who talked constantly about his older brother Carter, how Carter had raised him after their parents died in a car accident when Danny was only 12 years old and the state wanted to separate them. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud as thunder, and Patricia Whitman's face had gone pale as she realized her carefully constructed case was crumbling before her eyes like a house of cards in a hurricane. James continued, his weathered hand steady despite the profound emotion in his voice and the weight of memories he'd carried alone for too long. "Danny spoke about Carter every single day we served together, how his brother had worked 3 jobs to keep them together when the state wanted to separate them into different foster homes, how he'd taught Danny to drive and helped him with homework, and been both father and mother when the world tried to tear their family apart through bureaucratic indifference. Danny was scared in combat, like every good soldier should be when facing mortal danger on foreign soil, but he never doubted he'd survive the war and come home to build a family because Carter had taught him how to be strong, how to endure impossible circumstances, how to never give up on the people you love, no matter how dark things became, or how hopeless the situation appeared." Carter felt tears streaming down his face as he learned, for the first time, about his brother's faith in him, about conversations that had taken place half a world away while he'd been struggling to build a life worth living back home in Iowa. Danny Hayes died saving 4 wounded soldiers from an IED blast outside Fallujah on March 15th, 2021, James said, his voice breaking slightly for the first time in his testimony. His last conscious words before the medics took him were about his brother, how proud he was of Carter, how he knew Carter would be an amazing father someday, how Carter was the strongest and most honorable man he'd ever known in his 19 years of life on this earth. James paused, composing himself with military discipline before continuing with renewed strength and purpose. "I promised a dying soldier that I'd watch over his brother's family if anything ever happened to him, that I'd make sure Carter knew how much Danny believed in him and loved him. I've been keeping that promise for 3 years, and I've never been more honored to fulfill any mission in my 30-year military career, because watching Carter be a father has restored my faith in the goodness of ordinary people doing extraordinary things every day." The revelation hit the courtroom like a physical force that left everyone stunned and breathless with the weight of unexpected truth. Carter sat in complete shock, finally understanding why this stranger had appeared in their lives, why James had known exactly what they needed and when they needed it most. Patricia Whitman's face had gone ashen as the foundation of her carefully constructed case crumbled beneath the weight of James's testimony and the reality of Carter's true character as revealed by someone with unimpeachable credentials. Judge Crawford leaned forward, her expression no longer neutral, but deeply engaged with the story unfolding before her bench like a revelation of human dignity. Logan looked confused but hopeful, sensing that something monumentally important was happening, even if he didn't understand all the adult words being spoken in his defense. The silence stretched for long moments before James continued his testimony with the precision and power of a military operation designed to achieve a specific objective. James turned to address Patricia directly, his voice carrying the quiet fury of someone who'd seen good people destroyed by bureaucratic indifference and systemic failure to protect what mattered most. You question this man's fitness based on his income and his grief. Judge his parenting by your checklist instead of its actual results in the life of a child who thrives despite difficult circumstances. I've led men in combat, Mom, and I know what real strength looks like when it's tested under fire and pressure that would break most people completely. Carter Hayes possesses more courage in facing each day as a single parent than most people show in an entire lifetime of comfortable circumstances and easy choices. He described the subtle signs of Logan's happiness that Patricia's forms could never measure or quantify. His easy laughter around his father, his absolute trust in Carter's protection, his unmistakable pride in their modest life together despite its challenges and limitations that bureaucrats saw as failures. This child isn't damaged by poverty or single parenthood, as you suggest in your report, filled with statistics and theories, James declared, his voice ringing with conviction that filled every corner of the courtroom. He's been shaped by love so pure and sacrificial that it would humble saints and shame kings who rule with power instead of compassion. His behavioral problems at school aren't signs of neglect or inadequate parenting. They're the natural response of a boy who's watched his father sacrifice everything for him and wants desperately to be worthy of that incredible love that asks for nothing in return. James turned to look at Logan directly, his weathered face softening with genuine affection and deep respect. Your Uncle Danny used to show everyone a photo of you as a baby, Logan. He called you his little hero and said you were going to grow up to be just like your dad, brave and kind and strong enough to face whatever the world threw at you with grace and courage. Judge Crawford called for a brief recess, during which Carter finally understood the full scope of James's sacrifice and the profound depth of his connection to their family through bonds forged in combat and sealed by death. The older man approached during the break, his military bearing softened by visible emotion that he no longer tried to hide from view. I should have told you about Danny sooner, James said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. But I wanted to observe, to make sure you were the man he described with such pride and love, to honor his memory properly by protecting what mattered most to him. He revealed that he'd lost his own son in Afghanistan, a boy named Logan, who would have been approximately the same age as Carter's Logan if he'd survived the war that claimed so many young lives. Watching over Carter's family had been James's way of honoring both fallen soldiers, of finding purpose and meaning in his grief-stricken retirement years when the silence of civilian life threatened to overwhelm him. Danny asked me to look out for you, James admitted quietly. But you've given me far more than I ever gave you. Watching you be a father helped me remember why we fought overseas, to protect families exactly like yours. When court reconvened, Judge Crawford delivered her verdict with unusual emotion, evident in her normally composed and professional voice that had pronounced judgment on thousands of cases. She acknowledged Patricia's stated concerns about the challenges facing single-parent households in modern society, but found absolutely no evidence whatsoever of actual neglect, abuse, or inadequate care in Carter's parenting of his son. Carter's love for Logan was evident in every interaction she'd observed or heard described during the proceedings, and the boy's occasional behavioral problems were completely normal responses to loss and trauma, not indicators of poor parenting or an unstable home environment that endangered child welfare. The judge commended James's testimony as the most compelling and moving character witness statement she'd heard in 23 years on the bench, a testament to the power of love over bureaucratic judgment. She dismissed the custody challenge immediately and issued a formal reprimand to Child Protective Services for pursuing a case based on socioeconomic bias rather than genuine child welfare concerns rooted in actual evidence of harm. The immediate aftermath in the courtroom was electric with raw emotion that had been building for months of fear and uncertainty about their future together. Logan launched himself into Carter's arms with desperate relief, both of them crying openly as the terror that had shadowed their lives for so long finally dissolved into joy and hope for tomorrow. Other parents in the gallery, many dealing with their own custody battles and bureaucratic challenges, stood to applaud James's testimony and the judge's decision with genuine appreciation for justice served. Patricia Whitman gathered her files with tight-lipped frustration, her bureaucratic certainty shaken by the judge's harsh criticism of her methods and motivations that prioritized appearances over reality. Carter approached James with overwhelming gratitude, finally understanding the true depth of the stranger's sacrifice and his unwavering commitment to their small but precious family that had survived against impossible odds. In the weeks following the hearing, their lives settled into a new rhythm that felt both familiar and completely transformed by the knowledge of their connection. James became a regular presence at the garage and their dinner table, filling the grandfather-shaped hole in Logan's life while helping Carter navigate single parenthood with greater confidence and emotional support than he'd ever imagined possible. The older man taught Logan about his Uncle Danny's courage and sacrifice while showing Carter that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was wisdom, strategy, and the foundation of every successful mission, whether military or civilian in nature. Patricia Whitman was quietly transferred to another department after an internal review revealed a pattern of bias. Her case files examined for similar instances of prejudiced judgment that prioritized appearances over actual child welfare and family preservation. The garage began thriving as word spread throughout Cedar Falls about the custody hearing and James's powerful testimony that had moved an entire courtroom to tears. Customers who'd previously harbored doubts about Carter's stability returned with renewed respect and increased business, understanding finally that strength came in many forms. Other single parents sought his advice and friendship, drawn by his story of perseverance and ultimate triumph over bureaucratic persecution that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. Logan's behavior at school improved dramatically as his sense of security and family pride returned stronger than ever before, though he still missed his mother deeply, and probably always would. The boy no longer felt ashamed of his family's circumstances, or afraid of losing his father to the whims of social workers and government agencies that claimed to know what was best for children they'd never bothered to truly understand. The story that had begun with judgment and fear had transformed into something beautiful and unbreakable. A family born not from blood alone, but from choice, sacrifice, and the unshakable bonds of love that transcended genetics and bureaucracy alike. Real heroes, they'd all learned through pain and revelation, didn't wear capes or carry swords or win medals for extraordinary valor in distant wars fought on foreign soil. They wore work clothes and carried lunchboxes and showed up every single day when the world felt dangerous and uncertain, when easy answers didn't exist and hope seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. They held on when everything wanted to fall apart, chose hope when despair offered easier alternatives, and loved without conditions or reservations that might protect their hearts from breaking. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, they appeared in courtrooms when you needed them most, ready to speak truth to power and remind everyone that love, pure, stubborn, sacrificial love, remained the most heroic force in the entire world, stronger than law or bureaucracy or the opinions of people who confused poverty with failure and grief with weakness.